we should still be able to get a pretty good idea of the density of growth in our lakes for at least with that species.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
President Schmaltz, one more question.
Yes,
Garrett,
Senator Taves, go ahead.
I've seen in a couple of our lakes these big floating globs of algae to where it almost look like a bog by themselves. Is that, do they just go away by themselves, or is that something rare to this year?
No, the district has put together outreach material for this in the past. It's actually filamentous algae, which I think is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
More often than not, it's not really a concern at all. It's very rarely harmful, and it just tends to disappear within about a month. It just kind of soaks up any excess nutrients that are in the lake, forms this filamentous. Well, actually forms on the bottom of the lake, and once it becomes buoyant enough, it floats to the surface. So kind of overnight, I know it startles people. So we field a lot of questions about that. And it's certainly something that we can send out to the lake associations again this year with some information. I'm sure there will be more inquiries about it.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Garrett. Appreciate it. We have no new business that I see, so we'll move to old business. And we have then proposed addition or district office space and visiting. And I think Brian is here from ISG to cover that for us.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, can, Brian.
Good. Yeah. Well, good evening, and thank you for inviting me to your board meeting. My name is Brian Paulson. I'm an architect with ISG, and I think there are some new board members, but some of you recall we probably started this a year and a half or 2 years ago, maybe longer, in discussions. And so here we are again. So hopefully we can get things going in the right direction and get some space figured out for you. Did Mike share with you the space program that I had put together, the preliminary space program, space needs?
Yeah, we have a copy of that if Bobby can put it up.
Brian, I shared both items, the memo from Jason and then the sheet that you put together.
We should have a copy of it here for you.
Okay, so the page 3 looks like is where we would like to start.
There you go.
So what
Thank you.
yes, thank you. That's great. So what I did is 2 years ago when we started this project, we had met with staff and talked about space needs, and through that we developed what's called a space program or space needs program. And so there was some discussion, and that was started when you were looking at the Willow Point property, and as we all know, that didn't happen. And that was an existing building that had a fair amount of space in it as an existing property. So several weeks ago, or actually probably last week now, I was asked to kind of reevaluate your space and look at some trends that we're seeing in corporate office environments and other office environments, specifically to remote working, and just taking a deeper dive into what your space needs might be for a facility, either new or a renovated space. And in the discussions, there were topics about spaces that maybe could be redundant in other communities to use, specifically large meeting spaces and or education space. And then we also talked about having the ability to expand the building at some future date as your mission continues to evolve and grow, that there's having some ability to be able to expand your facility. And that was probably more specifically about outreach and research and education. So right now, the program that we have in front of you is what I would call sort of a stripped down version of what we had started in Willow Point. And as a reference, Willow Point was about 7,500 square feet of space in the program, and we're right around 3,500 or 3,600 with this, yeah, 3,600 with this program. So I then had a chance to sit down with Mike and actually Steve last week. We kind of walked through some spaces and talked about what could be reused in the communities and how to address the remote work environments. So this is reflective of that. And I can certainly go through each space individually and talk about them. Or if you have any specific topics you want to bring forward right now, we certainly can. Otherwise, I can kind of walk through this line by line if you'd like.
I should just make a comment is that one of the things we had tried to do is to come up with a conservative initial approach. As we approach the public in that, I think, we need to start at a reasonable level, I think, even though we can expand later on as we have additional needs. But the thought was to try to start out with a conservative approach, and this is what Brian had responded to. So that's what we see here. And so we welcome any comments that people have as we go through this. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll kind of just kick it off. So in discussions with Mike and I think as staff actually back in the Willow Point program, we looked at a couple of offices. That hasn't changed. We did look at some staff conference rooms, and these staff conference rooms, they're smaller. They're 120 square feet, and they're actually the size of an office that could be converted to office space if one needs it. They have the capacity to seat 4 people, so they're not overly large, but they certainly can suffice for kind of inner office or maybe some private meetings with some constituents, whoever it might be. So we did look at one large conference room that has a capacity of 6 to 8. That it could actually have some expandability to it if you wanted to have it adjacent to one of the smaller rooms. It could be expanded then to maybe somewhere in the 10 to 12 range if there's a desire to have that kind of capacity. The next item, 104, is what we labeled informal collaborative staff meeting space. So taking a look at what you currently have for your facilities now, Mike had sent me some photographs of some of the space you have now. And so we looked at that as a kind of an informal meeting space for staff. It's pretty popular in a lot of our corporate work now where, it's not private, it's semi-private space, but it also serves as your kind of gathering space for breaks or lunches. And, it's just kind of that hangout space that's allows for some, collaboration between staff when they're housed in this facility or dropped in for the day to get caught up with, what other people are doing. I think that's important that, you stay informed and what the rest of the staff are involved in. 105 is there are 13 staff were identified in the previous program. And with the tendency now to be more of a remote working environment, what we've seen in our corporate work is somewhere between 65 and 75% of the workstations are reduced for drop-in workstations. And these aren't overly large. Again, you kind of carry your office in your backpack. And this is what we've been seeing. So we looked at 8 sort of drop-in workstations that are kind of a 5x6 area. You could have a 5-foot desk, and there could be a 2-drawer file cabinet and a pencil drawer, but you may be working remotely or working from home. So most of your stuff is with you either at home or could be, like I said, in the backpack if you have that kind of flexibility, or you're out in the field and you have a place to drop in for the day, take care of your paperwork, and then move on. So we looked at 13 staff, but we created 8 sort of drop-in workstations. It says 6 by 6, but actually that's probably more like 5 by 6. But oh, excuse me, they are 6 by 6. I'm sorry, we increased the size from 30 to 36 square feet. So that's probably a bigger change from what we were talking at Willow Point, where there isn't really any dedicated workstations, or at least in this vision. If you choose to do that, you certainly can. But that's a pretty flexible kind of space and a flexible number at this time. Central files, I zeroed that out, but I added it back into the common workroom, which you see further down in 1.10. Boardroom and education room, I did take this out at this time. There was some discussions about having other facilities in the Forest Lake area that you currently have your board meetings in, and that's a possibility that could continue to operate in that manner. And then education certainly could be an additional space that could be added onto the building, or it could be held remotely in another facility. If you have some kind of collaboration with another entity that, you know, will allow education to occur in their space, or it could be an addition onto the building. So that's a pretty big chunk of square footage. As you can see, that's almost a third of the overall building net square footage. Table and chair storage, I zeroed that out as well, because the boardroom, education room sort of go hand in hand for tables and chair storage for classrooms, you know, things of that nature. And then we did look at a reception waiting area. We kept that in there. About 250 square feet, not overly large, but you don't have a tremendous amount of visitors coming into the facility. And it does have capacity for 4 to 6 feet. Your mail and deliveries would come to this area that would then get distributed to whomever they need to go to. You know, pretty modest reception area, 8 by 8, but not overly large again. And obviously you would want this to be somewhere near the front door so you can kind of control who's accessing the building. The common workroom, that's a pretty good sized space, but it's kind of that space that we see files in, we see office supplies, copying machines, fax machines, if you still use them, any kind of printers, you know, things of that nature. If you do any kind of printed brochures or anything, that gives you some room for collating of documents and stapling and mailings and things like that. So it's a pretty good sized room, but you'll likely use all of it from our experience with, you know, a lot of office stuff and just additional supplies. We did include some lab space in here. It's a water lab. Think of it as about 160 square feet. So 10 by 16 would give you 160 square feet. Looked at a counter, a bench height counter, a sink and refrigerator in that space. Then we assume maybe adjacent to that would be some lab storage, which is about 400 square feet, which again, if you think about square footage or space, it's a 20 by 20 room. But in discussions with Mike, you have, I think it was about 160 square feet of off-site storage if you're renting right now, somewhere in that range. So the thought is that you could get out of the rent and make this room large enough to bring that storage into that space. And then we looked at a toilet room with a private shower that would serve probably near back by your lab area, you know, for your folks that are out in the field and might get a little muddy and they want to clean up before they go home. There would be a toilet, a room with a private shower. And then, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, the private shower is the line below. I'm sorry, we added a separate shower room. But it would be accessed through the toilet room. And then we had an additional ADA toilet that would likely be somewhere near your staff or maybe up by the front entrance, by the reception area. So as I looked at the size of this facility and the toilet requirements, we are, this is the minimum we would need to meet the Minnesota Department of Plumbing Code. We would need 2 toilets. So this does meet the plumbing code. What's not included in here, as I mentioned, is boardroom, education space. And if we do add the education space, we will have to add more restrooms as well, because then the capacity or occupancy would go up, and consequently we'd have to add more restrooms. And currently we don't have the 3-stall garage or a garage and storage onto this space program at this time. And I know this is probably new to a lot of the board members, so we'd love to hear from you as well on your thoughts on the program and just usage of space. That's what we're here today, is to really lay out an idea of square footage. This certainly isn't cast in stone. It's a place to start a conversation, and so we can get that started.
Thanks, Brian. Any reaction from the board? Or if you need more time to think about it, you're always welcome to send Mike and Brian a note after you've had a chance to digest it. But if anything comes up to now, please comment.
Mr. President, managers, one thing now that, we're there at this point, what we also could do is get some footprints of some spaces in the metro area that are similar in nature, either watershed district or environmental facilities, and then perhaps go take a look at a couple. I'm thinking like the one down in Oakdale, Little Canada, there's one office for the Ramsey, Washington watershed district. Maybe had theirs for about 15 years or something down there. And just to give a few examples of spaces that others are that have constructed and are currently utilizing for multi-purpose functions.
I think that would be worthwhile to do. So how does the board feel about it?
I agree with that.
Chair Schmaltz, this is Manager Baki.
Yes, Manager Baki, go ahead.
I know this is kind of early in the process, but have we considered making it an eco-friendly site, such as having passive solar or solar panels and that type of a thing to make it more friendly to the environment?
Good suggestion.
We were the architects for the Hormel Nature Center, and obviously that was located in the current Hormel Nature Center site. It's about 500 acres or something like that. But yeah, we made it was really a high performance building without, I will use the word breaking the bank. So we did look at, we added about an acre solar, PV solar array on the site. We had some geothermal ground source heat pumps, some high performance building envelope, high performance glass. So if we were to compare that building to a LEED building, which I think most people have heard of LEED buildings, it probably would have been somewhere, check the box as a LEED silver or possibly a LEED gold building. And so we're very familiar with a lot of sustainability strategies, not only just the building, but on the site, as well. It's not all about the building, but it's also about the site. And I think that's a great idea, and it can be done in such a manner that it's also affordable. It has some payback to it.
Good, thank you, Brian. Yeah,
it's,
something, it's another option we can offer to the public as we start
Mhm.
talking and see what the reaction is to that. That's something that probably would be acceptable, I would hope.
mhm.
But it's great to bring that up, and so we can put it into our list of options, so.
Yeah. Chair Smalls, I just have a couple of comments.
Go ahead,
Question.
Manager Anderson.
I was going to ask about the LEAD program, so I'm glad you brought it up. It used to be very expensive to do, but now you're seeing that there are more cost-effective ways to deliver that same outcome. So that would be, something to explore. I think having a organization like ours have that designation would be important. And so if there's an additional cost to do that, I'd like to understand what that is. The other question I had is, how much growth percentage did you build into this schematic?
And Mike, maybe you can address that, because I think it comes down to the staffing. And if I recall, I'll just give you what I remember from our Willow Point program was there was some growth built into it, and I don't know what the baseline staff is and what additional staff were factored into this program.
Okay. Well, it's not important for tonight, but at some point, if we can kind of keep that as a statistic, so no matter what we're looking at, we can anticipate how long we might be able to stay in the building.
Mr. President, managers, I think there were kind of two elements that we could look at. One is, as Brian mentioned, is designing it such that you could add on at some point, anticipating that the population of the district and the area will continue to grow. And this also is this skinny down version of what space would look like. We did make some assumptions that, in a hybrid workplace environment, not everybody would need a drop-in space at the same time. However, if we were going to have everybody in the office at the same time, there would be, obviously there's the two offices, but then there's the two small conference rooms, and then the large one, which, could function as three different spaces or something on a very temporary basis, just for the day or something, plus the 8. So that gets us out to, roughly 13. But the drop-in workstations, if we wanted to add a couple, that would, again, not be a substantial addition for square footage. But it's really just how we would want to configure. But, and again, we wanted just to have a starting point. And of course, as we go, and I'll work with Brian to maybe get a couple different examples of plan sets for some different sites. And then we'll try to select a couple, at least in the metro, that we can go look at. And I think, we could either set it up as a group. I can coordinate with the entities, or I guess just make sure that they have the if they're open yet or not either. So I don't know. But so we'd probably want to coordinate to make sure that we could get in and take a look around.
Hey, any other comments or thoughts?
Chair Schmaltz, Manager Baki.
Yes.
Just regarding Mr. Kinney's suggestions of looking at office examples, rather than all of us going to a site, could a video be made and shared at one of our meetings?
Yes, and I can probably even just check to see if they have completed some recent videos of their facilities, because I think, as Manager Baki suggested earlier, sometimes they have different features that they like to demonstrate. So the Mississippi WMO, for example, was constructed to be a stormwater research kind of facility. So they have some interesting components. Ramsey, Washington, they had a target for being a zero discharge stormwater site. So they have multiple rain gardens, they have porous blacktop, et cetera. They have a rain garden roof for their garage. And I think they have some passive solar. So they have different pieces. And so we could take a look or just ask. Otherwise, I'm sure it would be fairly easy to go down and take a look. And then, at a later time or whatever we get to a certain point, if there's certain things or something of interest, we can either individually or as a group go look at them.
I had
Jack?
one comment. I just thought that garages and storage for the vehicles I think is maybe pretty important to the staff. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't consider that as part of a basic footprint to start with. I don't know how much additional cost that would add, but having to store stuff at outside location like your boat and that kind of stuff is not really convenient. So I think that's something that could be considered as pretty basic as far as supporting the operation. I just pass that on to Mike and see how staff feels about that too.
Mr. President, managers, I believe that to be accurate and that we would be looking for that. I think it'll depend on the site. If it would be just a standalone shed or if we want to have it connected. And then if it's going to be unheated or heated, just a few things, but we just kind of at least wanted to start on the conversation about the facility.
Right.
And then, as we maybe work into the other topic about, developing our relationships and partnerships with local partners and, nonprofits or private entities about the getting support for the building. And then also I had asked Brian, another thing we'll work on is to see if there's some metrics out there about, like I know that cities like to compare themselves as to acres of park space per 1,000 residents or something, whatever the metric is, but to see if there's a similar comparison for available meeting space per community or so many residents, and do some projections, because that would maybe then want to influence whether or not there's how much of a need or demand there is, because when we were looking at the Willow Point property, yes, there were people that didn't want the restaurant to be utilized, or the former restaurant, I guess. But there were citizens that were reaching out to me about wanting a place for, to come in with homeschool groups, for example, or some other entities. There's 4-H clubs. They've come and done presentations to the board, things like that. So if we could we'll work on trying to develop a better understanding about the community's needs for public spaces as well.
Okay, any other comments or ideas for Brian or on the drawing? Okay, good. If not,
I think, Steve, I think Jackie was trying to.
I was
sorry.
muted, sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Jackie. I didn't see you.
Yeah, I just have a
Sorry.
couple of questions. It's more about ISG's capacity to do that type of outreach with the public, surveying, taking the temperature of desires and wants and needs of the public. Is that something that your company does?
Yeah, we do, and that's the next topic.
Oh,
That
okay.
kind of leads into our next topic here. If we're done with space.
Yeah, I was just gonna move to that topic, so it's kind of timely that you brought that up, Jackie.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there's a little proposal here
answer
to
is
look
yes.
at. If you have, maybe we can put that up, Bobby, if you could. Page 2. There we go.
So there we go. So we have a gentleman in our office by the name of Jason Gilman. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to attend today. He's in Green Bay. He's a city planner by trade, and he's in charge of the state of Wisconsin planning group, and he's at some conference. So, and he's comes with a a public background in community engagement and as a public official. So he's been really outstanding in his ability to conduct these community and public engagement sessions. For a guy from my side of the fence, I call them kind of open houses or community engagement. He's got probably more interesting names than I do, but it nonetheless, he got some. This document is kind of a high level kind of approach, really based upon some discussions that he's had with Mike. I certainly hasn't had a lot of discussion with the board, but he's seen this is kind of an outline of maybe 5 phases or 5 steps in the process on how to gather data, how to engage, and who, we need to identify stakeholders and how do we engage them. And then his phase 3 is, identifying some kind of project metrics. He uses social, environmental, cultural, and economic criteria, and I think he used the term. There's actually 6. I think we have 4 or 5 here, but triple bottom line or something like that he uses. But anyway, he's got a process in place that would assist you in engaging the community and identifying the stakeholders and maybe we've even gone to the point where he's personally called the naysayers and has talked to them about projects and to try to have a conversation with them about why the project is needed and talks through it with them about the whys and then he creates some kind of an implementation strategy. So he's rather new to ISG. I'm working with him on a project right now in Iowa for a community, and it's for a community center, but it has some of the same steps and same processes that he's outlined here, and it's a really good process, and I think his results have been pretty remarkable on getting projects approved or both by the community and by the stakeholders, but also getting the supporters to really become the supporters and the naysayers to not be the loud voice. I think what happened to you and maybe Willow Point was the minority became the loud voice and the supporters kind of backed off, and his approach is nip it in the bud and have personal meetings with the naysayers and to them what the project is for and why it's needed and what benefits going to have to the community. So yes, he's the guy, and he's very comfortable leading this process.
Yeah, I think the Willow Point situation was so unique that we shouldn't use that as a bellwether. But this is a great process, and because it's still available, and it might still be available when we get through with this process. So I like this very much. I think using that city planner background and that engagement that they're used to all the time in their comp planning and so forth. I think this is great.
He actually, his background also was he worked for the county in was it Winona, I think, and he had as a county employee, was heavily involved in the watershed districts in Winona County. So he understands watershed districts as well. So he doesn't just come from a planner background.
Great.
Good. Mike,
Well, this
do
is
we-
just a really, go
Yeah,
ahead,
it's
Steve.
a
I'm
high
sorry.
level view. I was wondering, Mike, if we should look at perhaps having a scope of work put together for this aspect of the project?
Yes, we will need to work with that, work with Brian and
Jason?
folks over there. We had an agreement previously in place, but that was for the other property. So we would just need to rework that. And I guess, the board could probably make either a motion or at least, I suppose you don't want to, without seeing the scope, we're probably not going to do anything. So I'll work with Brian and we'll bring a scope back and then we can work on the agreement as well. Yeah.
That sounds good. Any comments from the board on that, or everybody okay with that?
Looks good.
Okay.
Manager Smalls,
Yes,
Manager Loth, I just wanted to share, I know Jackie said that Willow Point might still be available. There is a pizza pub has, I guess, moving in there at some point. That was discussed on a thread on Nextdoor. I can share if you're interested, but I don't think that's going to be available based on what was shared. So
Good.
for whatever it's worth.
they're gonna have to sell one heck of a lot of pizzas.
Yep.
I was gonna say it won't be available for this summer, but then again,
2 million days,
Yeah.
that's probably
6 months from now.
2.5 now.
I think I can.
Maybe there's more money in beer.
but they'll-
I think I can.
Maybe
confirm
there's
that.
oil on the property, we don't know about it. Okay. Okay, that's good. If we could move ahead on that scope of work, then would be great. Just before we leave this, before we leave this topic, I want to make a couple comments. We need to start, I mentioned this before, and maybe we should have a timetable on this, is trying to do an inventory of the properties we own right now, as well as properties that we think might be appropriate in the future for a site. And then do some kind of a assessment in terms of the characteristics of those properties as it relates to potential for engaging the public. Certainly, something downtown doesn't have much appeal, but something out in the, we've got a couple of properties that got some unique characteristics to them already that have been identified by EOR. We just need to get those lined up and see where we stand. And then if we can look for others at the same time, it would be helpful, I think. And that's one thing. And the other thing I'm like to see us somehow begin to put the plan together, or action plan, is deciding, we had talked about doing a benchmark study of people that have been successful with educational efforts in the community. And those could be both small or large, but it'd be nice to look at a couple of successes that we might look at and say, how does this fit into our community as an idea or as a model, just to get us started? Because we have very little experience here. So I don't know whether you've got somebody working on that, Mike, or plan to get somebody working on it, but I'd like to see something start to take shape in that respect in terms of a plan and somewhat of a timetable to bring that to some kind of a head that we can experience and look at. So. Any other comments?
Brian, I'm just wondering if,
You know-
if any of that can be rolled into this other work with Jason.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that, about the educational facilities and, the benchmark, other educational facilities and, in the area, and, who are the users, and,
Right,
and,
exactly.
where are the gaps? Who's not using them and why? And,
Right.
things like schools and school-age kids, and, where are they going, or are they not going? And is there an opportunity? I mean, I can speak to the Harmel Center, the Nature Center. I mean, that was specifically designed, well, it was a nature center and exhibit space, but also heavy outdoor and indoor classroom space as a part of their programming. but they had, they tapped into the school district and even surrounding school districts. And we're also doing a nature center in Webster County, Iowa, that's just going out for bid. And again, they've tapped into the schools and the community. And also they've tapped into the communities as an event space. It's a little more unique environment than maybe an event space in downtown Forest Lake, but it appeals to a certain group of folks, and so that they were able to tap into that. But yeah, I think we certainly can start to look at some of those educational facilities. And as you're looking at the site, I think it would be helpful for us to be able to tell you, here's what you need for minimum acreage just to support the building and the parking. And, that's just for the building and its associated site work. Then you can take it beyond that for any other, research or outdoor education component or whatever it might be. But we can certainly help you identify how many acres you need just to support the building.
Yeah, and we need to understand why people go there and who goes there, as you said, and if it's not being used, why not? So those are all important things that would help us climb the learning curve, I think. And we especially need it if we're going to engage the public. So.
Right.
President Smalls. This is Chris again.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. You're kind of cutting out a little bit, so.
Sorry. Just quick question. Is ISG as part of the scope of what their involvement would be if we found a place? And I think this kind of was done last time, but it was kind of done quickly as far as determining a new build, the cost of building versus renovating. Is that something that is done with each location that is identified, or is there some process that can be done without having a specific site? I don't know if that is even a good question.
Yeah,
Yes.
I can address that, Chris. Yeah, we did that. We did that when we were evaluating the Willow Point site. We did also looked at a generic new build cost for a similar sized building, and so it's not real scientific. It's basically based on kind of current construction cost per square foot for the building and site development cost. But you do have to make sort of a broad assumption that the site all are don't have any unforeseen site conditions. You're not building on a swamp, or we're not putting a building on piles or anything like that. It's conventional footing foundation. You have to make that assumption. Otherwise, you're going to be doing soil borings and all these sites or whatever if your shortlisted sites are. And maybe that's something you'd want to do. But so yes, we can certainly look at if you were to acquire a building and the renovation cost versus new build. Yes, we do that.
And I think that's an important thing because costs have gone up so much here in the last 6 months, and I'm not sure they're going to be coming down very, very quickly. So maybe the better value is to try to buy something and renovate it if you can get something close to what you need. But anyway, good question, Chris. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, Brian, thank you very much. Appreciate your
Yes,
input.
Thank you.
And
Mike, we can touch base tomorrow or early next week about next steps.
Don't we want a motion on this to go forward? I'm looking at a recommended motion, recommended action.
Oh,
So I'm ready to make that motion.
we probably should, yes. Let's go ahead. You gonna
I
make that
will-
motion?
I will make that motion as presented.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second? I'll second that motion. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, then let's, Bobby, if you could please do a roll call vote.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Loth,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The motion passes. Okay, next topic.
I'm gonna check out here, so thank you, everybody. Have a
Okay,
good
yeah,
evening.
thanks, Brian. Appreciate your attendance tonight and help. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep, thank you.
Next topic was item B, which is the Lake Association Grant Program. I think Mike's going to give an introduction, and then Jackie's probably going to go through some of the materials. Mike?
Right, Mr. President, managers, so little more than a year ago, the district started talking about this concept about offering some form of grant program, either as a component of the community grant program or as a standalone. So there were a couple of different looks at it. Staff worked on developing his own version, and then Manager Anderson offered to develop something. There are funds that were put into the 2022 budget for this program, but we really haven't finalized it. So right now, the proposal is that we would just take a look at it, get the information out to the board for consideration for a future board meeting. But Manager Anderson, I think I'll let you take the floor from at this point.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to have Bobby help me. Bobby, I'd like you to pull up the Appendix D page. And I'm coming back to that one, but there's an introduction on yeah, this one. Nope, go back right there. That's the one. And if you can punch it up a little bit, that'd be fine to extend the size. We've talked a little bit about this. This is, as Mike said, mostly for the benefit of our new folks so that you can come up to speed. And some of you I know heard some of the conversations last year, depending upon, you know, how early you joined the board. And so you've got some feeling for it, but just real briefly, how this all came about. At the end of 2020, I was looking back at some of the things that we've done and things that we haven't done. This program has always been a part of the district from the first plan going forward. And it was meant to engage the public and to get them thinking about ways that they can help in this process of achieving clean water. And the grants were broken down into sectors, agriculture, commercial, for our business community. There's examples. We should probably put together a little storyboard on this so that people can understand where they are throughout the district. And one of them was the community, as Mike mentioned, and that was sort of a broad category to include groups and civic oriented type organizations. But one of the subsectors was nonprofits, and under the nonprofit is where lake associations could have come in. But the program is a little complex, and so it really didn't take hold the way that I had expected, or board members who had been with this whole progress over the years. So what I came up with is a separate program for specific lake association activities. And the rationale is all in here, but I'll just give you just a synopsis. Is that one of the triggers for me was reading the preamble to the MPCA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency grant program, which we tap into for their loan program, their zero interest 10-year amortization loan program. And it's been very helpful for us. But what struck me is that they didn't have boundaries on specific programs. They gave examples, but the program was really designed so that the users, could determine what type of project they were going to do, as long as it had that component of working toward healthy lakes and rivers and groundwater. So that was really, the concept that I had, and brought that to the board. And like anything new, it takes a while, for folks to understand it and come up to speed. The other thing I discovered is when I went on the website, I hadn't looked at these before, but when I went on the website to look at how the process worked for the existing programs, it was really complicated. The language was not as clear as it could have been. And so that wasn't helping either. And so part of this is just revamping that part too, to make it user-friendly, to make it understandable in a shorter amount of words, so that you're not overwhelmed with, all that detail, but still accomplishing the same goals. So the idea is to have these lake associations become idea generators, also become self-sufficient in the programs, tapping into district staff, both on staff and contract if that's needed, to ensure the success of the program the best way that we can, and then to also utilize the staff knowledge on various elements of these concepts that might be needed. And the reason that I chose to do the focus on lake associations is because these are to be not singularly beneficial for an individual, but community-based, so that all of the folks in shoreland areas, but also in the shoreland zone area, in all of our communities. That's the most restrictive planning section that you can have, and there are strict guidelines and ordinances and rules on what can be done in those. So if you'll move to the picture page with the photo of the shoreline, Bobby. Thank you. Okay, in concept, this is sort of the opening, front page of the instructional information. And if you go to page 2, one thing I want to point out, though, excuse me for just a minute. One thing I want to point out is, whether it's this picture or any other picture, the point is to highlight one of the areas that we really wanted to focus on for this program. And that is shoreline, natural shoreline establishment. And this particular photo shows something that we've seen in presentations from our engineers in the past, where you can see the property in the middle still has a portion that is into the lake. And you see the erosion of the shoreline when you lose that buffer on both sides. And so illustrating through pictures what we hope to accomplish is also, I think, going to be important in the communication piece to help incorporate some of those things. So again, we're not just looking at bland type and it's confusing. So if you go to the next page, this is the language for the public to understand the object of this whole program. And you can see in red, this is still a work in progress. This is a draft, but it's pretty well, set, I think, as far as what I can do with it. I really want to have input from the board. We'd like you to review this whole thing over the next 2 weeks and then put it on the agenda again on the 8th, so that we can get your input and hopefully get this thing wrapped up by the end of June, if we decide to go forward, so that we can utilize it still this season, this summer, with our lake associations. Now, most of them know about this program because I've either talked to them about it, or members of the board that serve on those lake associations have been talking about it. And so there's some familiarity with the concept. Just the details is what's missing. And this is a good place to start that reach out so that we can get input before things are set in stone and it becomes a published program. Again, if we all agree to go that way. On the paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, the upper paragraphs are talking about what I just talked about before, is that if we want this to be something that they can think about. We've given some examples of some of the projects or programs that they might do. Paragraph 3 is about outreach and education. And we added this language about reaching out not just to the community of residential, but also educating local government units on the common sense of using best management practices and ordinances that help promote these natural environments. The next paragraph, when it starts applications, is really where it's getting into kind of the structure portion. And that's where I think we can really use some input. This basis here of covering up to 75% of the project or program. Now there's a little typo I need to correct. I tried to create use programs and projects jointly so that we're not confusing people. So a program is something that doesn't require a capital project, you know, in the ground kind of thing, but more like the education programs would be a program, of course. So that explains that portion. Again, it's just the same as what existed, where the district would pay up to 75% of the project costs up to a maximum annual grant amount of $15,000. And that $15,000 is per lake. It just so happens that our 4 major lakes that we are divided into in our district are the 4 that have the Lake Association nonprofit status. And so as the biggest lake, as it says, in Washington County and in our district, that's Forest Lake, of course. And that has 3 distinct basins. And so their amount would be a maximum of $45,000. And Comfort Lake has 2 basins, a distinct, there is water that passes back and forth, but each has distinct characteristics. The Comfort Lake Association became the Lakes Association about 6 years ago, combining those 2 under one organization. Little Comfort is too small to have any kind of viable representation. And so that was added. I would like that considered as 2 basins. And then the other thing too, one of the concepts on doing this rather than by basin, I've looked at using it by acre or by acre foot. And that's something, it gets a little bit more complicated, but once you get that down, it's, you know, it's static. So that wouldn't be a little bit of work up front to set it up, but it wouldn't be that bad to actually implement, I don't think. But be thinking about different ways in that area. That's a particular area that I think we could use some new perspectives on. And the part of this now would be, again, it's meant to be a packet that would be ready in the form of a booklet or a folder of some kind, where you would have these nice, clean representations of what is to be, or what the program is all about. And then we'll get into an application here in just a minute. If you go to the next page, 3. And this is, again, just a way to explain in a graphic format what we're trying to accomplish. And we're trying to, again, build up our outreach. There's no way that a district or even an SWCD, although they have more capacity probably because of their county basis, but there's no way that a watershed district, especially our size, can do that outreach, you know, and touch base with everyone. So again, one of the underlying concepts with reaching out and partnering with the lake associations is that you've got an engaged community of people that think about water all the time and think about improving the water resource all the time. And so this is a way to help them accomplish their goals and also the district's goals. And so this education piece, I think, is in almost every lake association's mission or purpose statements. And so it's a good fit in my opinion. And then again, it's a graphic illustration. This will be part of the packet so that if they get confused by the words, they can look at this chart and understand exactly what's happening and why we want to do what we're proposing to do. And then on the bottom of that page, if you just dial up a bit, okay, that's really a thank you to the lake associations and the work that they have done and are doing and will continue to do. And it's just encouragement that we appreciate it. We know what you're doing, and we want to help. We want to help that. We want to partner with you in a real positive way. And that continues on into the next page a little bit, so they'll get formatted to be on one page. The one thing I did want to point out is that we've got a couple of standards on objectives at the state level. And one of them that we don't talk about too much, we got the MPCA standards, of course, for clean water and non-polluted waters. And that's what we focus on primarily here at the district, is making sure that we restore the unhealthy lakes to healthy status. And then going beyond the state standard is the district's goal. Originally, it was to get as close to pre-development levels as we could. And by doing that, we create sustainability. And so it's not just hit that number at the state level, which is an average, and then go on. We actually do the work to establish what that pre-development level was to the best of our ability by using those deep core samples in each of our lakes. So we can incorporate that type of information in little fact sheets into this brochure so that we're spreading the word on what the district has done up to this point, and the charts that we create that show the status of the lakes every year. So this can be used also as a means to distribute information and to get the story out about the district. But this last one, this last paragraph here is talking about the goals that are stated in the Clean Water Council's report. And the Clean Water Council was created to be the facilitator agency, if you will, for all of these new state funds that were coming in to be used and distributed to organizations to accomplish goals toward clean water. And their three goals are waters that are fully swimmable, fully fishable, and sustainably healthy. And so it would be really good when you have time to read. Something else is to go on the Clean Water Council site and pull down that report. They set, when this was first started, it was right after the Legacy Amendment was passed. And it took them a few years, probably 4 or 5, to get that first report out, because they had to do a lot of monitoring and field work with the MPCA to establish those standards where they were at that time. And then they have goals that they want to achieve, you know, by the time this Legacy Amendment is over. So read that. That is why that statement is there, just so you know that. And then I think that's it. So let's go back to that packet that starts with the cover memo. We're almost there, I think. Nope, it's the Appendix D. Yeah, there we go. The next one, the next page. Okay, so this is the beginning of the grant Lake Association, the Lake Association grant program. That's part of the packet for the application. And again, this is outlining what those steps are. How do you apply for this grant? That's what this page is about. And if you go to the next page, this page here is the actual grant application program. And this did not need a lot of modification because it was pretty simple. It was pretty straightforward. and understandable. There's some shading that was in here that I took out, but if you can keep paging down a bit. Yeah, and this is where you describe the project and program information. There's a work plan it talks about that's to be developed. And yeah, I think that's the next page is the last one. There might be one more after this. Here's talking about the work plan that's required to be submitted along with that application. And the last page. Yeah, and then any permits that are required because based on the work that they're doing, sometimes that will occur, but not always. And so we want to make sure that the association gets those permits in place before anything can happen. And the bottom is just for staff to fill out. So the permit comes in, the grant application comes into the office, and then staff reviews it for completeness. And then the last step, as you'll see when you read through this, is for it to come before the board. Now, one of the iterations had the staff actually doing the review process and granting the, or sending it to the board, for granting of the authorization. But I thought in the beginning of the program, at least, the board would want to see these. And one of the suggestions in the narrative is to have a representative from the association come and do a small presentation, maybe 10 minutes, on what it is that they want to do. And that builds, relationship with the board and the association. Leaders probably will come, or members that show up. And we can ask the questions that we want to ask at that point as well. And so that's something, just be thinking about all of those aspects, and if you would tweak something or add something, or maybe you see it as working in a different way, make sure you write down all those comments. Call me if you have any questions. And then on this program, and then hopefully, like I said, on June 9th, at that meeting, we can bring all of this comment, have a discussion at that point. And if there's only minor things, we can maybe implement that with those corrections made. But if it needs more work, then we can bring it, hopefully, like I said, to that next meeting in June, the end of the June calendar. And if it needs more time, it needs more time. But that's what we wanted to present tonight. Give you a little bit more discussion and our background, so that you can be prepared next time for discussion after you've thoroughly read through it. Any questions?
Manager Anderson, Manager Baki.
Mhm.
Yes, I really like what you've put together here, and I did take some time to read through it. And of course, right away, my mind is jumping to how this grant could be used locally.
Mhm.
I would suggest that we consider approving this tonight and move it forward as, I don't know how the other associations are working, but we have meetings coming up in June
Mhm.
that this could be presented there as a resource to help support a project. And as you know, the project I have in mind includes the partners like the city of Scandia, and we really need the watershed district to help with the planning to make sure that we're not impinging on a wetland. So I'm willing to make a motion that we approve this tonight.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful. We can always tweak as we go along. Mike and I talked about that this morning, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It's something new, and we want to get it out there and working, and then we tweak it as it goes along as needed. Oh,
Manager
Steve,
Smalls,
you're muted.
go ahead, Manager.
Sorry, I'm muted. Go ahead, Chris.
I was just saying that you were muted.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
saw you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Manager Loth, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just wondering if Manager Baki has made that motion, then we would look for a second.
He said he was ready to do that, Chuck, and so I'm gonna hold him to that and let the discussion go on. So he'll come back to him. Manager Schmalz will go back to him.
Yeah, that was my intention, is to keep it going for a while here till we
Yeah.
get into it more.
Yeah.
Thank you though, Mr. Holtman. I appreciate the help.
Is that proper? Is that proper Robert's rules, Chuck?
Yes, that's certainly a reasonable way to proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, go ahead. Or you were just pointing out that I was muted. Okay, I'll go ask.
I did have some comments, so whenever.
Go ahead. Why don't you do it right now?
All right, thank you, President Schmalz. Obviously, joining the association or the watershed back in July, I wasn't involved in the conversations in, March of April of last year. I think I've seen this come up in August and September, maybe.
Yeah.
So I personally feel like, and with this coming out at 4:05 today, I don't feel like I'm prepared to vote on this tonight. I do appreciate everyone's time, Manager Anderson, on putting this together, but I guess I'm not comfortable making a motion or voting on this tonight. I did have some other questions too, and I guess I'll lean on Manager Anderson and President Schmalz and maybe Mr. Kinney. Is there any information that can be discussed tonight or maybe provided between now and when our next meeting is, that's just a high-level summary of the commercial and community grant program? I think that's what you were talking about or referring to with like a storyboard. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I guess I would just like a little context about that program, how it developed, some of the ways that it's been used and kind of the purpose. I guess any sort of background, high level summary regarding that.
Well, I can give you a few examples right now if you'd like to have them in the commercial area. But if you want a more complete list, it'll take some time to put that together. Not a lot of time, but certainly that can get sent out to you in written form. But
You
if
think-
you'd like, I can give you 3 examples right now.
Do you think that would be beneficial to consider as we work through this?
It could be, but they're going to be different because they're commercial, so it's not quite the same focus as the Lake Grant program. But that was the intention, is to segregate it into these different areas so that that specific area can utilize it in the way that they need to. One is the Keys parking lot. It's a pervious parking lot. And they were the first ones when this program was set up years ago to do that. They were building in a very sensitive area, and so they were partners all the way with that concept. I've always thought that we should, think about some way to kind of call those folks out, because it takes courage to do something different, and the money helps, but it's not gonna, the grant money helps, but it's not gonna, do the whole thing. And so you've got to have that committed individual, but just to recognize them through some type of sticker on their, or banner kind of a sign, not a small one, I mean, on their doors, just recognizing them as good water stewards. So that's something to think about when we get into our communication planning. The other thing that was really impactful for Forest Lake, when the Broadway Avenue redesign was done years ago, it was a 4-way stop. It turned into that circle and widened the road a little bit. But the big thing was that Lake Park there used to flood all the time after heavy rains. And so it was almost unusable. And so we changed the slope of the surface water running down more toward that circle. And then also included traps in the storm sewer areas so that we could trap all of the junk, that gets down there, plastic bottles, you name it. And so we really helped clean up that area, and we worked with the county and the city both on that, because the county was involved in the street redo. But we also, working with our administrator at the time, the city agreed to put in that iron enhanced storm filter treatment through the length of Broadway, or most of the length. And that goes into a treatment pond, behind that commercial area, kind of where Norman Quacks is, back in that area. And that pre-treats the water before it goes into the ditch system that ends up in Comfort Lake. So it's things like that that are encouraged. And the big apartment building in downtown where the Mallard's restaurant is in the basement, that was a GON practice and or project, I mean. And my understanding is they didn't need the grant fund, but they did this as part of their design. And so they have a stormwater treatment pond or facility basically underneath their parking lot. And so that's pre-treating everything before it goes down into that same ditch system that ends up in Comfort. So there's things like that, but there's more projects, there's shoreline projects and so on. And I think there's more than we recognize as not the number that we want to achieve, but it's certainly good, and we can do better. So we can put a list together by location. I'm pretty sure, pretty quickly.
I think
Yeah,
not only
Manager
a list-
Lowe, staff has actually already created such a document, or has at least worked on. Just wasn't included in today's agenda just due to the kind of the last minute scramble of things.
Mhm.
So that's something we could provide.
Good, thank you, Garrett.
And not just the list of projects, but also just some context around the programs and kind of how they've developed over time.
Sure.
No, exactly. And that's exactly what that memo was trying to show, was just the history of where this program started, kind of the iterations along the way, and exactly how it was used.
Yeah, and that's part of that explanation that you're looking for, is also part of the plan, our new 10-year plan. And there's a section on those, I think they're called best management BMP practices or something like that. But you'll find that description you're looking for there.
Thank you. I just had one more question, and maybe I should know this, but on page 2 of the memo,
Mhm.
It seems like EWM isn't part of something that the watershed does, but we do treat for CLP and I think purple loosestrife and flowering rush. Can someone explain to me why AIS isn't all treated the same way from the watershed standpoint, and why we choose not to get involved with EWM?
Chris, I think that would be a topic we're going to discuss next under the EDM section on item C. So if you want to hold that question until then, I think it'd be a good time to cover it, along with other information that you might be interested in on that topic.
Yeah.
Oh, sounds good.
Okay, Dave, I was going to ask you, what example of a project do you have in mind for Bone Lake?
Well, managers, I've shared this information with you before. There's an area owned by the city on the north end of Bone Lake, between Moody and Bone Lake, that is owned by the city of Scandia. Local volunteers built a trail on the one side of the wetland that is there now, and people walk the trail. And the plan is, and the city of Scandia Parks and Rec Department has put together a plan of how a trail would be built on the other side of the wetland. And that plan is that we would build that this fall with volunteers from around the community. And then the idea is that the two trails would be connected with a boardwalk. And I know we've talked about with Garrett possibly reclaiming material, but that didn't work out. And so yeah, there'll be resources needed to build some kind of structure. And of course, there will be permits needed and some direction from the watershed district as to how we should do that. So I see this as a great opportunity to build these partnerships and involve local volunteers who are more than willing to put forward a little sweat equity into it. So that's kind of what's been on the burner. And if we can get this process moving, I know we're meeting in June, and it would be something that could be shared there and see if that board would approve applying for the grant. So that's my thinking, and I would see this as a real opportunity to get Jackie's project going. I mean, it seems to be the pieces are there, and like she mentioned, you know, it can be tweaked along the way. I think that's always part of anything new that you launch.
Mhm.
So does this then set a precedent where then the park board or Forest Lake can come in and every time they want to build a trail, come to us for money?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that one, Steve. I don't think so. I think it's more about a local group of citizens who want to provide access for the public to city land as a park, and that would include schools and getting kids to come and learn about the environment. So I really see an alignment with what Jackie has put in this grant proposal, the purpose of it, and how it could be used for this project.
I think that could fit under education and outreach pretty easily based on that description, but, and it's it's also protecting a wetland. I think that's more important, one that's close to that body of water, that lake, and that has value, a tremendous value. The only thing I was thinking about is that, you know, there are a couple of different grant programs other than this one that would be, I think, a perfect fit for that project. And depending upon how it comes out, this is where the staff would come in, is vetting that against these other grant opportunities through the DNR. And they've got many programs for many different things, and they're particularly heavy right now on protecting and restoring wetlands. And so that might be a help for the city, and because of that protection quality, you know, that might fit perfectly into the district's assistance mission with our LGUs about protecting that water body. And then the education piece would be, I think, a good fit for the lake program. So you could actually maybe hit 2 home runs right there instead of just 1.
See, the community and commercial grant program is directed primarily at water quality improvement efforts. So all those projects we talked about had a very quantifiable impact on improving the water quality.
Well, so would this wetland though, too. That's what I'm
Right, but I'm
talking
saying
about.
this grant here opens up the door to a broader perspective of projects. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I asked the checking question simply because we need to be aware that we've got to manage our money. And so we want the money to go to the mission and goals we have. And so when you start talking about building paths and walkways, you know, I'm thinking maybe we're starting to stretch the outer, not to say that's bad if it's education and so forth, but I think the board has to consider that. That's all. That's the only reason I brought it up.
Manager
And so-
Schmaltz, I guess my response to that would be the grant has yet to be written and
Mhm.
given to the watershed district for consideration. So
No,
there's
I know,
that
but it's-
process.
but we're here to pursue the fringes of this idea. So, yeah, and I guess the other question I have is that this is a lake association grant. So would they then be responsible for, like, for example, if they're going to do a shoreline restoration, they would get 8 or 9 shoreline owners together to work on a shoreline restoration project as a group then? Or how would the individual participate in this? Unless
Well-
it's through the lake association.
I was thinking of it from a standpoint of outreach and education. And so you have to educate people on the importance of the natural shoreline conditions and what it can do. So it's pulling together all that information where the staff can help as much as they can, but we're members, we are supporting members, partners really, in the East Metro Water education organization, who also represents the Lower St. Croix. And they are working on a lot of boilerplate kind of information, brochures, flyers, packets for that type of education. But our staff can help organize the information that's available already from the state level and pulling that all together. So that was what I was thinking about. Now, if
Okay.
you want to do programs like this, there's nothing to stop you from doing that if you're doing it on that aggregated level. And you know, it can come to the board for consideration. It's got to it can't be something that's just done for one residential or one neighborhood. It's got to be a program where you're looking at the neighborhoods, I think, all around the lake and trying to handle them on, you know, every year, so many that you can get done. But I would think that would be okay. But again, I appreciate your enthusiasm about this, Manager Baki. I really do. And I think we do need the board to think about this, you know, for the next couple of weeks and come back with some real commentaries that can tweak and perfect some of these concepts. And then if we can get that done on the 9th, then I think, you know, there's a real possibility it can be approved on the 28th of June. And your meeting's in June, so I don't think we could, you know, we would miss any deadlines for you. But I like the interaction and the concepts. That's the whole preamble for this, and the purpose of this is to not just have a programmatic set of ideas, but to, you know, let that creativity come out in ways that we don't even think about.
Good. Any other comments or questions?
Manager Schmalz,
Yes. Is that Doug?
President Schmalz, I had another one.
Oh, Chris. Okay.
No,
go
it's
ahead.
Chris.
Yep, I got you now.
Talking about the boardwalk, and I'm not saying that I'm against or for this. The thought arose a few months ago when Greg was talking about the Greenway visioning. We spent quite a bit of time discussing connecting corridors with stuff. And I think during that conversation, it was discussed that the watershed really isn't supposed to be involved in, you know, recreational space. So if that's correct recollection, how do we feel about potentially allowing grant funds to be used in something that we said that we directly can't or shouldn't be involved with?
Well, if you just think back to my response to Manager Baki, I think that there's a way. This is a project in conjunction with the city of Scandia and the Lake Association. The Lake Association's goal is to educate on the value of wetlands. And the city's goal is to have a walking parkway basically around this natural resource that they want to protect. And so I see them as two distinct grants. They can both happen with the district's help, but the Lake Association would be focused on that education outreach piece, and the city would be responsible for taking care of the grant for their park, basically their pathways and their boardwalk. And so there is a way to work together on those things. And again, the district staff is much more knowledgeable about grant opportunities. And that's where the project basically gets split. You know, you've got the Lake Association application, and then you've got a city application that may be reviewed by the same staff member. It could be a different one, but it's different pools of money. And so it's helping. One of our objectives in law is to be a resource for our local communities and technical experts, technical on water related issues, but also part of that relationship involves all of these grants that have come in through the legacy amendment to help us restore and preserve and educate people on the value of these natural resources that are part of the water system, part of the clean water system. So that's how I was thinking about it. So just having, Manager Baki come in with a plan that includes that park piece or that walking path piece, staff is intelligent enough to say, well, that fits over here. And so point them in the right direction and help them accomplish, what that joint plan is, but have the funds go to the right entities.
I
Thank
think
you.
that would work out. By separating them out, I think you can make a case for education versus the trail itself. So,
Mhm.
um,
And it's different grant funds too. Keep that in
Right.
mind.
I had a question just on the finances. We're showing the chart as the Lake Association funding 25% of that. How would other grants that enter into the program affect that 25%?
Well, Mike could answer this more than I could, but my understanding is that there's very few grants that will not allow other grants to help with the portion that's left for the entity. So if the watershed is taking care of 75% of whatever the number is, and there's this 25% remainder, then other grant sources can be used to fund that other 25%. And I think that's true on almost all grants, but I'm sure there's some exceptions. So Mike probably has a better handle on that.
Yes, Mr. President, managers, from that standpoint, so state grants cannot be piled on state grants. So that's kind of a normal, you can't use a grant from one state agency to complement another state agency. However, the feds do not have such a rule. You can use local or state grants to combine with the federal grants. So it all depends on the criteria for the entity. And so then I guess from the watershed district standpoint, we currently have an agreement with the city of Forest Lake and the Forest Lake Lake Association where at the city's request, they did not want to allow us to use other grant dollars to go towards the percentage of the contribution. So that was, so that's a precedence that we currently hold, and I think the board just reviewed it and approved it last month. So, but of course, the board can create the framework that they want for this. It doesn't have to be any restrictive than it wants to be. There would be the fiduciary responsibility from a public purpose standpoint. Are the dollars going towards the type of project that would align with the district's mission and watershed management plan. So that would need to be considered. From some of the mechanics, I guess it's not really clear to me, and these are maybe things to work out before the next board meeting, but it was somewhat my understanding that the board that in order to develop the dialogue, a lake association would come with a grant request to the board, and the board would consider it, and then the watershed would be a part of whatever project that would be implemented. So, but I'm also hearing tones of a suggested format where it would be an allocation, and then the board would be no longer involved. But I'm not sure if which one I'm understanding to be correct. But we'll just need to work those mechanics out before we come back to the board with some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess what I'm suggesting, Manager Anderson, is that we say 75%, that's kind of misleading. It's 75% up to 15,000.
Yeah.
So basically we should probably incorporate that somehow into that chart, because I guess what
Well-
I'm asking is that if there's another grant, I think that the stakeholders, if you're using public money, the Lake
Mhm.
Association should have at least 25% into the program. It's the thought
Mhm.
I'm having. And that the other grants then could reduce the total cost of the program. For example, your Eurasian Water Milfoil program is 60,000. 15,000 of our dollars is not going to cover that 60,000. So, if your grant of 25,000 though from the DNR will reduce it down further. But then the Lake Association is going to have to pick up the rest or get other grants to cover it. But there should be at least some money from the Lake Association into the program, I think, of some substantial amount to make sure
Well-
they're accountable for later on for follow-up, et cetera, et cetera.
But that's why the program structure that was already there is maintained here, but it doesn't have to be. So if the board has other thoughts about how to do it, that's why we need you to take some time and think about that. But the goal that you've just stated is already built into that information in the draft of the plan here, because it is a 75-25.
Yeah, but people remember a picture than they do a couple words in a paragraph. That's four paragraphs into a big
Well,
page. So I think
on
we should
page- on
should
page
clarify
three-
that.
On page 3, there's a graphic, circular graphic that shows a pie chart that shows that 75-25. So if you think that we need to do more, we certainly can. But
Yeah,
that
I
is,
just say 75% with an asterisk saying up to 15,000.
well, yeah, okay, all right.
Right.
So,
Otherwise, you think you're going to get, I've got $100,000 project, the watershed's going to put in 75,000. No, we're
Well-
not going to do that.
okay, well, on that, yeah, that can be clarified. It states
Yeah,
that
okay.
on page 3, but it certainly can be put in the graphic as well.
All right, good. Any other questions? I think we had some good discussion on this, and I think
Mhm.
everybody's thought about this, and we should, if you have any other thoughts or want to frame up your thoughts, please send them in and we can consolidate them and then discuss them at the next meeting. Unless there are any other questions.
Yeah, I don't think that we need to consolidate beforehand, Steve. The thought is to bring your ideas to the next
board?
board meeting. Yeah,
Okay, that's fine.
and we have a discussion like this, and then, together we keep what we want and weed out what we don't, and then we go through a rewrite. And that's presented to the board for action on the 20, why can't I remember this, in June? So the first discussion is on the 9th, and then we'll come back on the 23rd of June with a final draft, if you will, and try to get that out to everybody, a week in advance, so you have time to look at it.
Manager Bach, are you okay with not going ahead with your motion at this point in time?
I'll respect Manager Anderson's request to give it some time and
Okay.
let it cogitate for a while, but I am eager to get this going. I think it's a great opportunity for all lakes and lake associations.
Great, thank you.
I just had a quick question, President
Yeah,
Schmaltz.
Manager Ross, go ahead.
Is there something that Manager Baki can do between now and the end of June as far as alternate or complementary ways to help get that project going?
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. I was going to start a GoFundMe page as a way to get this going. No, I think, we can work with the timeline. I appreciate the fact that if we can really put our heads on this and get it done by the end of June, I think that would still give us time to, as an association, to pull it together. So thank you.
Mhm. One thing I would suggest is that we ask staff, primarily it's going to be Emily, I would imagine, to provide a list of wetland restoration and protection grant opportunities, and see if those would help the city of Scandia. Maybe talk to them first to see what they've applied for, but if they haven't, then we can use our grant application and research technical expertise to help.
Thanks, Emily.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the section C of old business, which is Eurasian water milfoil.
Mr. President, managers, wanted to bring this up, I guess, for discussion. We'll see if there's an action or direction that the board may want to consider with this. So EWM has been an elusive topic for the board over the years. I think Bone Lake was the first lake to have that invasive species in the lake, probably maybe back in 2010. And 2014, it showed up in Comfort Lake. And then I believe the year after or so, or 16, it showed up in Forest Lake.
Yeah.
So the discussion has been back and forth about which invasive species to cover, and this is Andrew Lowe's earlier question. And so there's been it's been somewhat of a category of, is it a nutrient or an impairment to the lake versus a recreational problem or some other ecological reason. So because we could say curly pondweed has largely been seen as a issue that, you know, it starts in the winter under the ice. You know, a cold spring or cold temperatures don't bother it. It's still going to come in. And we don't know until we do the investigation. And given the amount of plant material that's produced, and then historically it will die off about the 4th of July, and then becomes a source of nutrients, can, you know, add to the algal problem. But there, you know, it's then the EWM comes in typically later, is problematic more from recreational and is dying off by late summer or September or so. The flowering rush, though, is not an invasive plant that is in those categories. I think the principal reason there is that it's been out competing, but also it, as Garrett noted earlier, it is a plant that is unique, or at least appears to be unique to Forest Lake, and that it can spread both by rhizome and by seed. So from that standpoint, since this particular plant was growing quite rapidly, we had taken on that activity. So again, that's been largely a board level discussion and direction. At the same time, it is consistent with what we see other watershed districts do around the metro. And, you know, whether or not that's a reason to do something or not to do something, I guess, is really up to the board here. So I guess that's probably as much of a technical answer as I can provide at this time, Manager Loth.
I would like to add just a little bit. I was very much opposed to excluding Eurasia milfoil when we made that decision, but it was the board majority that obviously won the day, as it should be in a vote situation. And so so that's been something that, you know, has troubled me, primarily because we use so much of the clean water grant dollars, and the mission of the and the goals stated by the Clean Water Council includes those things that are most apparent to the public when they look at water bodies and determine that, you know, they're not good, and having the water body be fully swimmable is one of the 3 goals. that it has the maximum recreation value that it's possible on that lake, and the stream health. And so, and the background on understanding that goal is about fishing, keeping the habitat clean for spawning and for fishing. So we use those dollars for many of our programs, and yet some of those goals, you know, we don't seem to be conscious of or concerned with. What I know is this from my background is that with the district is that Bone Lake has been doing their program for I don't know how many years, 15 years, 14 years, something like that. It's incredible. And they've had good success. I don't know where it's at now, but we had an annual report on plant identification where Eurasian hybrid milfoil was 50%, over 50% of the plant life in the lake. And it's still considered an invasive species. And so I don't think that's good management. I don't think that that's a good way to look at this at all, just to let it go. And I do try to keep up on research on issues of importance to me. And what I've been finding is that Eurasian milfoil, actually it was EOR who made this presentation, I think just, 7 months ago or so. And what they're tracking, what the study is tracking, it's a big study, is that Eurasian milfoil actually does contribute to phosphorus when it's in the dying phase. And as it deteriorates and goes down to the bottom, you know, you've got that same problem that you have with any other plant. Now, the trick with Eurasian milfoil, obviously, is that it can create dense mats. And so you've got that concentration of these nutrients as the plant's dying. And so it can be a phosphorus add to the lake. So I think we've got to rethink, you know, our viewpoint that this is not a phosphorus producing plant. It is. And our district focus on phosphorus, you know, has been a good thing. My point was that we just don't have to exclude other things. We don't have to be a single pony, you know, trick pony in this cleanup process of ours. But phosphorus is the one that has the biggest impact on the reduction of algae. And so focusing on that is important, but not to the exclusion of other things. And the last report that I read and sent on to Mike is research that is proving that these big clumps of Eurasian milfoil actually trap E. coli, and it's from the waterfowl. And it's so dense as that's breaking up in the water column, it clings to those feathery little, whatever they're called. They're not leaves really, but I'll call them that for now, fronds maybe, to the milfoil plant. And so it's carrying that E. coli bacteria, you know, wherever this mat goes. So I do think that there are some things that we need to rethink about Eurasian milfoil. I think that if we're going to have a robust plan on AIS, which we do, that we need to treat all of it. And in our situation where we've got connectivity through all these streams and ditches and the river system, it can travel very easily from one lake to the other. So I do think that it's time for us to rethink our position on Eurasian milfoil and include that in our program.
Just a couple clarifications on that. You're right, it does create, when it decays, it could possibly create phosphorus, but that's true of all native plants, and it occurs in the fall. And in the fall, there's no algae. So basically, curly-leaf pondweed dies at 4th of July, right as the algae blooms are most prevalent. And that's why phosphorus from curly-leaf pondweed is a concern. It's not a concern from the Eurasian water milfoil. And as far as that study you looked at, I looked at it also, Manager Anderson, and from what I could tell, it was a study of the obvious. I mean, I'm sure that the E. coli is caught in all the vegetation, but it also shows that it doesn't really propagate out into the main lake. So it's really no hazard. It's just a fact of life that's been going on for hundreds of years. So, so those are 2 points that, you know, aren't quite as important as you might think. The thing that I want to point out is that the Lake Association grant program is probably most applicable to milfoil for the lake associations. And I think the grant program is good in that respect because the DNR now has made a lot of money available to lake associations for AIS control. And so by using this grant, they can access money from us to help address the cost of the milfoil treatment, which is good. That fits right in with what the DNR is trying to encourage. So I think we should try to encourage that DNR program. The thing that bothers me about this is that if you read about it, if milfoil actually goes rampant in Forest Lake, the cost of us trying to treat that by ourselves is going to be insurmountable. We're not going to be able to afford it. So I think milfoil is such an item that we need to have it's a community problem and we need to get partners involved. And I think I've been harping on this a long time, but the city, with all the taxes they get from lakeshore property, none of that money from Wyoming goes back to the lake or to Scandia back to Bone Lake. And I think the lake associations need to be more aggressive. And so by having this lake association grant program and limiting the amount of money the watershed district puts in, encourages partnership looking to help cover the costs from the city, the DNR, and other people that are going to be. And that's the best way to cover the costs, is to share the costs across the public, because the whole public is involved in this whole thing. And that's why I don't like the idea of the watershed carrying the burden 100% by themselves, because let me tell you, once we do that, the city is going to be more than happy to let us do it and not offer much help. So I think with the Lake Association grant that you proposed, it does fit nicely into what you're doing on your lake right now. And that the only thing is that you have to get Wyoming involved to cover the money you're missing, which you're missing some money. Otherwise, you have to take a loan out to cover it. So that's why I'm against trying to have the watershed carry the whole load on this one. It's not as obvious as Curly Lake, but it's much more dangerous in terms of what the implications are if it gets out, or it could be. And we've seen that in many, many lakes. So that's my caution on it. Other comments, please, from the board.
Manager Schmaltz, Manager Baki. Several years ago, I approached the city of Scandia about getting some of our tax money back into the lake. We have Big Marine also in the city limits of Scandia, and the mayor at that time, who is still our mayor, agreed. And so it was the first time they put a line item in the budget, the city budget, for turning some of the money back to the lakes. Now, how that money is being spent, I'm not current on that, but I think your point is well taken.
No, I think it is. And if you can actually form a small team with the city on a lake improvement committee, that's how we got started. And then you get other people involved, including the DNR at those initial meetings. And that's how you get the ball rolling. Plus figuring out how much taxation actually is there from the lake, which you can do at the tax office. So, but that's great. I think that's a step in the right direction, because there is money there that really belongs to the lake and to the shoreline owners.
So the only community left would be Wyoming and Chisago County for
right. Yeah, Washington County would contribute to us also. So they contribute to the milfoil issue.
Okay.
So I like this idea of just sharing the cost across all the people that are involved. And also it makes it easier to get more grants too, because we got everybody involved. So.
Oops, sorry about that.
So the way this would work, if you look at your grant proposal, Manager Anderson, I think your cost is $60,000 to do the lake. So if you've got a grant from 25,000 from the DNR and you get 15,000 from the Lake Association, that covers a good part of your costs. And then the Lake Association should put some money into that also. And then if you had the Wyoming, you would probably have it covered. But you can see how that fits pretty nicely in terms of, and if you got Washington County involved also. But that it fits nicely, I think. And this is probably where this Lake Association grant is going to be primarily used, I would think.
Mhm.
Certainly White Bear, certainly Forest Lake is going to use it if we have it, once it gets approved.
Yeah.
Because we're spending, we get some money from the city and the DNR in Washington County, but a good part of it, most of it comes from the Lake Association. So,
Mhm. Well, what he's talking about is this, I don't know if I mentioned it here, I think I did, but Comfort Lake was granted a permit to do an all lake treatment for Eurasian water milfoil in the DNR region where we exist. I think our office is out of Grand Rapids, and it's, compliments to our president. She's a fairly new resident on the lake, 3 years, I think now, and she formed a very good relationship with the regional person from the DNR. They were very involved in the self-treatment that we did, like Bone Lake has been doing. The board or members went around with a pontoon and did their own treatment the year before with Floridone. And that's very expensive, and it's gotten more expensive. And so you can't rely on that for future year treatments. But given the amount of lilies that we have here, the DNR has always been watchful of that and wants to keep Comfort, from losing that value plant. And so we feel very lucky to have granted this. Apparently it's the first one in this region that's been granted. And so it's still a research project under the DNR's classification. But we weren't relying on that grant to be available because of the time it's taking to get it ready. But we did find out that there's an opportunity to apply for additional monies at our May meeting with the DNR. They do keep a reserve because 25,000 is not very much when you want to do this type of research on a bill that might be 60,000 or higher. So we're pretty confident that there's going to be some additional funds coming. The Lake Association, of course, will contribute their portion. And so I think we're going to be okay.
pretty
But I'll
amazing
keep
that you got that approval, considering that milfoil is only a small percent of your lake. So that's really amazing to me. Because
not
Clear Lake
last
had
year.
to jump through 5 years of things
Yeah.
before they convinced the DNR to do
Yeah.
that.
Lake Eurasian milfoil last year was robust during the drought. It was thicker than it's ever been, and
Okay,
in more places. And so I think that's what that
Tipped the
tipped the
scale.
scale. Is the DNR hadn't seen it that thick before either. So
okay. That's scary. That's what
I'll
I'm
keep-
talking
I'll
about. If it
yeah,
gets out
I'll
of
keep-
control,
yeah, I'll keep you posted on how
it
it's
doesn't
going.
doesn't take much to get it out of control. Are there
No.
any other comments on this, or what's the action we want to take tonight on this? Because I think it fits well into the Lake Association grant program and as we just discussed.
Well, it's not just for this conversation wasn't just about what's happening with Comfort Lake. It was about the whole philosophy of whether or not our AIS program should be an umbrella program and not an exclusionary program. And should it include all AIS?
Right.
And I'm going to make a motion that we include AIS Eurasian water milfoil under our complete AIS program.
Is there a second?
I would like to know how that would affect our budget. I'm not as familiar with EWM management when it comes to prices, but I think for me, it would also be important for the board as well. If we did take that in-house, what would that do to our budget? Like
We would probably have to do some work on that, but just to give you an example, we've been fighting Eurasian water milfoil, trying to keep it in Lake One for about, this is the 6th year. We started out with 3 acres. It's now up to about 35 acres, but it's still in Lake One. Hasn't been able to get out because of the treatment. And we did a pretty aggressive treatment last year, and it was very effective. We'll see now this spring what happens, but that's costing us about $40,000 to do around 30 acres.
Oh, wow.
So we've got 2,600 acres. We got 2,600 acres in the lake, and there's about 1,200 acres in Lake One. So 30 acres out of 1,200, you know, you have to hunt for them really. So if you have to do 600 acres, well, maybe $300,000 or $400,000, but I think we should have somebody look into that for us before we vote. If that's a question, that's my main point. So we should probably get that quantified so the board has a good knowledge to vote if we're going to vote on this. That would be my recommendation. And then to have a vote next meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just a
Mr.
note
Walker?
of procedure there. You should see if there's a second to the motion before there's further discussion.
Thank you very much. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, the motion then, I guess it dies, and then an option to, I would think maybe it would be the best interest of the board. And I'll raise this question to the board. I'm asking a question to the board, whether we should take some staff time to look at what the cost of treating large acres of milfoil would be, just so we can get an idea what it might cost on Bone Lake or Forest Lake or Comfort Lake.
Based on our historical plant surveys, delineations, correct? Because
Right.
that, yeah, and so you'd want to look at maybe the last 3 years or something of costs.
My concern is that it would spread though. Just like it's happening in your lake right now. For 1 year, it could go Clear Lake, for example, it took over Clear Lake and they had a tough time, even though they couldn't even boat along the shorelines.
Mhm.
They would not approve a total treatment of the lake because of the risk of killing all the native plants and upsetting the ecology of the lake.
Yep.
So evidently you're around that because you're using fluoride or something different, I guess.
Mhm.
I don't know what the details are, but somehow you've been able to get around that. So
Mhm.
I think the concern isn't how much it's going to cost now. The question is, what is it going to cost if things get out of control in any one lake? And I think it's only a matter of looking at cost of treating 2 or 3 or 400, 500 acres. And then we would know that number, and then we could see what impact that has on our budget.
I will add that, you know, certainly maybe in Forest Lake, it could get out of control, or Comfort Lake, but on the flip side of that, you know, Bone Lake, the district did, before I got here, did treat EWM, and the last several years I've been with the district, that hasn't been a thing. And Steve McComas has put together reports about Eurasian water milfoil and looking at the soil nitrogen levels. And in a lot of the literature that you can take a look at about EWM is that, you know, I think it was even dropped in the chat, is that there's an initial boom, and then over time that nitrogen in the soil is actually used up. And so EWM can go from a major problem in some lakes to being, you know, a very minor nuisance. So just something I want to throw out there, that long term, sometimes it does get better in this certain with this certain species.
Yeah, that was said about our lake because we don't have as much nitrogen as Forest Lake, for example, in the sediment, but it's 10 or 8 years and growing. It's not diminishing during that time. So I don't know what that time frame. That would be an interesting question. Is, you know, what is that time frame for it to stabilize or get to its maximum point? You know.
Well, with zebra mussels also, zebra mussels growing and making it clear of the water, it means it allows to expand it deeper too, also deeper water, and be more prevalent too, which is a problem. So, because it does outpace the other native plants. So.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we're going to postpone this, and I think, does the board agree that we should have staff to do a little research on this to figure out what the commercial cost is to treat larger acreage of milfoil, and anything else they feel might be relevant, like Garrett pointed out. If that's the case we should maybe look at those numbers for Forest Lake again to see how much nitrogen is in the bottom and whether there's a chance for it to really expand or not.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think following up with, I think it was Kyle from EOR that did that presentation for us. And look at and talk with them about the research that they've been doing.
Yes, I'm in favor of gathering some more data. So,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you. So
Likewise.
then we'll do that then. Okay, that's it for this, I guess, unless there's any other comments on Eurasian water milfoil.
No, thank you for the conversation. That was really good.
I
And
think it was good. It helped
Yep.
flush out a lot of information. So
Yeah.
moving along, a report of staff. Administrator Mike.
President, managers, no, thank you. Yes. Good discussion on a few different topics this evening, but I have nothing to add beyond what's in my report here. Unless
Okay,
there's
thank you.
questions.
Any questions for Mike? Okay, if not, we'll move on to EOR.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President and managers.
Greg.
I'll just hit on a few things. Permit program, we're starting to get a little busier here. We got a couple bigger projects coming in that we'll be reviewing soon. And then also related to that, there's 2 city road projects that I'll remind you of, one on Forest Lake and one in the city of Scandia, where we're working with them to get some BMPs implemented. So we've been attending some meetings, some pre-con meetings on those, and looking forward to seeing some BMPs implemented around both Bone and Forest Lake. And then the 2 big construction projects that we're wrapping up for later this fall and winter, the County Road 50 iron enhanced sand filter. We just wrapped up kind of 90% plans on that. So we're, plowing forward to hopefully get that out for bids before too long and potentially start fall construction. And then similarly with the tax forfeit project, we're moving along with that, and hopefully after things freeze up, we'll be ramping up construction on that this winter. So lots of things going on, very busy, but some exciting projects coming up, and I'll leave it at that unless there's specific questions.
I just have a comment, Greg. There's a development coming in, I think it's the last open area by Comfort Lake, and it was at the Wyoming Planning Commission meeting that I attend, about every other month or so. And there was recognition of the drainage problem along 260th. That's been quite a problem for a while. So I want to make sure that when you get to that one, if we could just have a 10-15 minute conversation about it. There's wetlands also that we need to make sure are protected. I think it's something like 12 or 13 acres on this property. It's almost half of it, and a lot of it is on the top of the slope or the hill. It's kind of a cliff actually, that it borders the Sunrise River. So it's part of the Sunrise River protected area. So I'd just like to point that out to you, and some discussion I had with the developer afterwards. They're very open and interested in whatever conversation we can provide and help.
Okay, great. Yeah, I
Thank you.
assume you're talking about the Comfort Lake Overlook project.
Yeah.
I had seen a very rough preliminary sketch of that a month or so ago, maybe a little bit longer. And
Yeah.
at that point, I told them that I didn't feel like the project was, well, they really hadn't addressed wetlands or stormwater buffers. And so I provided that comment to the city. So hopefully that made it to the planning commission. But I'm not aware of that specific drainage issue along 260th. So yeah, if we could touch base sometime, that would be good.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for EOR? Okay, thanks, Greg. Smith Partners, Mr. Holtman.
Oh, nothing, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Report of the treasurer, Manager Anderson.
Yes, that's me. Well, you can see again that we're in our tight zone. Our tax monies will start arriving next month, probably toward the end of the month. And life will be much better then. But we had bills of $279,874.43 and income of $16,012.52. And we have a positive balance in the accounts of about 400,000, just under that. So we'll be able to make it through. So I would ask that you accept the treasurer's report and pay the bills.
Do we have a motion?
I will make that motion, Manager Baki.
Thank you, Manager Baki. A second from someone, please.
And I'll second that, Manager Taves.
Okay, thank you, Manager Taves. Any discussion or questions? If none, if we could take a roll call vote, Bobby?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Loth,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Yeah, and just one last comment. I just wanted to just update the board that we have a draft of the new format, and that was sent out to the work group that consists of Manager Taves and Ted Hansen, who just joined us on the CAT committee a couple months ago. He's a retired CFO, and Mike and I. So we'll be looking at that next, well, it'll be the 2nd of June. We have a meeting to go over that and make whatever changes or tweaks or comments, and then we'll be bringing that format to the board in June to take a look at. We'll still present the information in the manner that you're looking at now until we get that format approved by the board. But it's going along very nicely.
Okay, I have a question on that because I wasn't aware that we had moved that aggressively into this. So I had talked to Redpath, and up to this point in time, we spent almost $1,700, which is 5% of our accounting budget on this project. And from what I understand is that we're using Saga, which is a government software program, and we're actually just duplicating the headings of the Rice Creek Watershed District's budgeting system. So, you know, we've had an excellent financial system since I've been here, and the policy has been that we've made necessary changes to the formats based upon specific issues that have come up that required a change. For example, accounting for loan payments and other things. So I don't know why we would want to switch software programs and then move to the format from Rice Creek Watershed District, which I think is probably running behind us in getting things done, especially when we haven't had any problems with our financial system. We've had, by adding more detail and making it more complicated, you're going to increase costs. You're going to increase chances for errors. We've never had any audit problems with our financial system. So I can't imagine why we would want to change. So maybe you can address that question, Manager Anderson. How is this going to improve our decision-making and our control ability?
Well, there were comments made by the new members, some of the new members, all of the new members. I can't remember, but I know at least two. I've never been happy with this report. It's not as transparent as what I'm used to seeing on financial reports. And the sentiment was expressed the same by the new members. And it's time to change for transparency with the public as well. And I think that making this change, yes, there's going to be a small cost up front, but once we get into it, it's going to make things actually much easier for the public to look at our records and understand them. the way that the funds are handled is much different. And the work group will see that when they're reviewing the reports. And talking with Nancy, it's going to make things a lot easier for her. And also she thinks more transparent as well, especially in the way that Rice Creek handles those fund accounts. So I think it's worth us doing. The cost is minimal. The information that is shared on some of the schedules is going to make it, in my opinion, easier to budget and make that process. We're going to save money there.
Well, I guess I would like to see a presentation to the board without doing any additional work with RedPath of what the formats look like now and how it's going to be better at our next meeting. In other
Well,
words,
that's
specifically because I saw the sheets that I looked at showed us bringing in all kinds of detail on salaries by line item, FICA and all this detail by project line item. And our financial system is much more thorough than Rice Creek's. We have many more line items than they do on project control and so forth. So why you'd want to complicate that number of line items by putting more detail into those things from a salary aspect, overhead salary, to me, I really have a hard time understanding that. But I think we should hear from you and let the whole board decide whether we want to proceed with this, because I think it's going to cost us a lot more money.
And that's the point of going through the work group process and then coming back to the board with our comments and including all of those questions that you want answered.
Yeah, I guess I was a little surprised because when I said you were gonna take a look at it, I didn't think I was authorizing a full work group, I guess, with spending this kind of money. So that's why I'm a little surprised about it. So I will be careful next time when I say yes. But since we're into it, I think we have to take a look at it before we spend any more money. So you've got quite a bit of stuff done already, so you should be able to show us next meeting how it's going to help us be better and so forth. Can we do that?
And that's the plan. The work group meets on the 2nd of June, and we're going to bring the drafts to the meeting on the 9th, and then we'll make a decision on whether we want to switch. And then in June, the last meeting in June, if we do make that decision, then it will be presented in the new format.
Manager Taves, have you been involved with this? Can you make any comments on this? Have you been involved enough or not?
I saw the draft that was sent out to me at least. And I spent about 2 hours on it today, and I struggled with it, to be honest with you. I'd really like to hear the logic and the reasoning for some of this. But I'm withholding judgment too. There may be some things that I just don't understand in it too, so.
Right. Okay. That sounds good. I think we can bring this up at the next meeting. And so you're going to meet one more time with the committee, Manager Anderson, June 2nd?
This will be the first meeting with the committee. I've met with Nancy twice. That's it.
Okay.
One by phone and the other one, well, actually, they were both by Zoom, so.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good. I think it'd be good discussion for the board to hear and then look at and see, maybe make a decision on what we want to do.
I agree.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Well, we have reports of officers and managers. Start with Manager Anderson.
No, I covered the update on the that special permit that we got for the all lake treatment. So that was it.
Manager Taves.
I just had a kind of serendipitous conversation with an economic consultant for Lindstrom. Yeah, because she noticed I was studying my notes for the meetings coming up. And it was interesting to get her perspective on the work of the watershed. And she was very supportive of it and really pushing in Lindstrom in their area to really look at water issues as they do their development up there. So that was a nice interaction.
Great, thank you. Manager Bakke.
Yes, just some observations. 1965, Bruce Tuckman did some research on stages of organizational development. You may be familiar with his work as the 4 areas he identified of an organization are forming, storming, norming, and performing. And I think when I came on as one of 3 new board members, we were definitely in that forming stage, kind of like the honeymoon, and everybody's getting to know one another and we're very friendly and congenial. And now we're moving into storming, where we're kind of trying to understand where we all fit into this piece of the board. But the good news is we're going to be moving into norming and finally performing. So just an observation I want to share. Thanks.
Thank you, Manager Baki. Manager Lowe's.
All I got is I'm not looking forward to North Shore Circle construction work that's going to be starting here soon. So
Just in time for summer, right? Thank you. I have no comments either. So we have summary and approval. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, summary and approval of board direction. Mr. Holtman.
I have 2 items, Mr. Chair. One is that staff will provide a list of wetland restoration and protection funding opportunities to the city of Scandia. And the second is that Mr. Grasky at an appropriate time will provide, will speak to the drainage issues and the wetland protection issue associated with the Comfort Lake Overlook project.
Did we have some action items on the ISG presentation in terms of following up to look at having the staff try to provide some pictures or a video of the sites that we might visit?
That was, well, that was Mr. Kinney's idea, and he said he would pursue that.
Okay,
But it occurs to me, there's also the request for staff to come back with some information about Eurasian water milfoil treatment costs.
correct. Okay,
And I believe Manager Lowe's wanted an overview of the Lake Association grant program.
okay.
Of the projects.
Right.
Yeah, that have been completed. Yeah.
not only the
Or-
projects, but the commercial and the community grant programs.
Oh, the explanations, yeah. Mhm.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts or comments before we adjourn? It's just a little around 9 o'clock. If not, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Manager Baki. A second?
I'll second.
And Manager Anderson, thank you. Bobby, you want to do roll call for adjournment?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Loth.
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Have
a
a
good week.
restful, wonderful Memorial
care.
Day weekend, everybody.
Yeah,
Yes.
same to you.
Hopefully we'll get some warm weather.